Let's also make sure I'm recording. You're going to want to rewatch this lecture, I'm sure. Play that one more time.
Sandra says that she's going to be there in like 15 minutes.
She's online.
Well, here.
Oh, here? Okay. It's cute. It's a green hobo. Awesome. All right. So let's see if this works properly the first time. Did not. You saw nothing? Nothing existed? This my main display. There we go. So we are going to be talking about pose to pose. So the reason why Greg knows what this lecture is because he wrote all of the pictures on this thing. He gave this as a lecture a couple of years ago at a place. He was kind enough to just give me his presentation so I could make up my own words to go with it. So how or what is pose to pose? So all semester we've been looking at the 12 principles of animation. We've looked at a few. We've looked at anticipation, a little bit of squash and stretch. We've looked at follow through and overlapping action. We've looked at arcs, slowing in and slowing out, the graph editor. And we've been looking at a couple of other things, but we haven't really talked about how to make your poses look better. So let's take a look at straight ahead action and pose to pose. We're going to also look at staging and a few other things. So what is straight ahead animation? Stuff like stop motion, where you're creating frames in a consecutive order. Like I said, stop motion, so you create one frame, then the next frame, and the next frame, and the next frame, and the next frame, and the next frame to get your animation. So you're going step by step by step by step consecutively. Pose to pose is what we mostly use in here and with 3D. So you have your key poses are created by a keyframe editor. This is you guys. So you create your pose on, for example, frame 1, and your pose on frame 10. And then your in-betweens are created by assistants. Your assistant is Maya. She doesn't do it very well all the time, but sometimes she does pretty well. Now, in order to get nice, good, strong in-betweens, you need to have good, strong poses. Strong poses, strong in-betweens. You have to work less hard if you create stronger poses. Good example of this is Milt Kahl. He makes good, strong poses every couple of frames, so that his in-betweeners that he had would have less work to do. He also made great poses. But that's not all we need. We need to create good staging for our poses, so we need to present them clearly. So we need to make sure our foreground, middle ground, background, and subject are easily seen. We need to make sure we are keeping in mind the rule of thirds. This is so our eye can better follow the scene itself. And then we also need to make sure we're keeping track of all negative space, how we're using it to bring attention to our foreground and our characters. So we can see this is very clear. We know exactly what we're looking at. And even though there is a background, it's not in our mind to think of that first. We have to really kind of focus on the background because our eye is immediately pulled toward our center here, our characters. How else can we craft good posing? With the pose themselves. This is a nice, good, strong pose. Reads quite well. It's very interesting. Wolverine is on fire. Obviously, this is something neat. We want to make sure, oh Lord, I'm getting a little buzzing on my screen. Our pose needs to be able to tell us about our character, how they're related to the scene itself. It's Wolverine, he's on fire, he's obviously fighting something, as well as the camera. It needs to tell us about the character. He's angry, obviously. So how do I make poses less boring? Well, you could add contrapposto. This is the offset of your shoulders and hips. You can add your line of action. This is how we can see what action is going to be taken. Ooh, an unknown phone call. Perfect. And then we can also make sure our silhouettes are clear. So let's take this dude. What should we name him today? Earlier he was Bob. We can change that. Steve, this is Steve. Steve is very boring, right? His weight's in the middle. His feet are straight forward. You know, very boxy. He's very inside of his little shell there. Paddle hands. His hands are just very static. His face is straight forward. It's just a very overall boring pose. If we were to lift this dude's leg, like so, how is his weight? It's very absent. He's still in his box as well. All of his weight is not where it needs to be. If he were to do this in real life, he would definitely fall. Oh. So, we need to shift his weight. I mean, try standing by lifting a leg and not shifting your weight. Like we automatically put that leg back down. So we shift his weight over. He now looks a little bit more natural. Still not that great. Huh? Yeah, he's a little shaky there. But now, like I said, his weight is good. This is something that takes newborn babies about a year-ish to learn. That's why it takes them so long to walk. But once they figure it out, they're like, ooh, I can do everything. Takes a full-grown animation student about 3 years. I want you guys to be above that curve. I want you guys to be at like a year-ish and a half. Yeah, so you guys want to be like a baby. You want to learn how to run after you've learned how to stand on the correct foot. So how can we also make our other stuff feel better in our posing? We can add some contrapposto. It's just Italian for counterposing. Art teachers love this word. You'll hear them say this word 8 million times. You're going to hear me in this lecture say 8 million times. But all it really means is that the shoulders and hips have a relationship of opposing angles. So let's go back to Steve. He's boring. It's parallel. Parallel is boring. Let's throw some angles in there. Make it a little bit more interesting. Oh no, you're on the wrong one. What do you mean?
Oh no, so they haven't seen any of this so far?
Are you seeing the right one?
No.
You're still seeing the Word doc? You shouldn't be seeing the Word doc. You should be seeing this screen. This one, right here. There we go. Alrighty. Let me introduce y'all to Steve. This is Steve. He's boring. All right, yay. Contrapasto. All right, so we can see this a lot in classical paintings and in statues. So David's got a really nice contrapasto. Oh, wrong spot. He's got that nice higher hip where all of his weight is settled. His other knee is pointing down on that nice, to add the little bit of relaxed stature. His line of action, that line that goes through the whole body, is curved through his chest, and his shoulders are in opposition to those hips. So let's go back to Steve. I've lost my spot of my notes. Steve has boring hips. Since his weight is settled on the one hip, we need to shift him. His chest is now in an opposite direction. He's still got a very straight line of action through his middle. Let's curve it. Looks a bit more natural already. Yeah, but not quite there. The spine isn't too terribly bendable, but now it's a little bit nicer. Now we can see that he has some motion. Whoop. There we go. But we can also throw some twisting into our contrapasto and our line of action. Now I'm all off, lost everywhere where I'm at in this lecture. I'm all bamboozled. Okay, yeah, we can add some twisting. So you can see by this man as he's walking very funly. He's got his main poses. He's got his in-betweens, and you can see his contrapasto and line of action through each one. We can also see this in real life. So here we have some fighters. You can see this man here has some great line of action and some contrapasto. And we can actually use that to turn it in 3D. So you can see that he is curved and rotated and twisted to get that proper contrapasto. Add a bit of bendability. Now, all of this starts at the beginning of a character. Character isn't fully created until you have how they're moving, so you set the full contrapasto in their body so that they can always act in the same way. Now, it can also happen in other parts of the body, such as the face. So you don't have to merely stick to full body figures for contrapasto. You can do that with eyebrows, lips. You can do it with hand gestures. So you can see he's got a nice line of action in his face. It's drawing attention to where she is because it's nice and open toward her. But more on line of action itself. It's often confused with arcing because it is a gentle sloping curve. But it's actually the line that goes entirely through the body, as you can see by old school Tom and Jerry here, that shows you how the body and the energy of that character is moving. If that line itself isn't smooth, it feels wrong and awkward. So when you're crafting your poses, make sure you're paying attention to that line of action, because like you can see over here on this side, this one would probably go straight across from the tip of this to his nose and down. That would feel a little awkward as compared to the other pose, which has a more accurate line of action. As you can see here. It also follows the curve of the spine, and you want to try to have as clean a line of action as possible. So let's go back to Steve. We've got this contrapasto, and we've got a small line of action in his chest, but if we add the rest of his line of action, they're still very straight and awkward. So since it grows out of the spine, what do we need to do in order to get him to have a bit more of a natural line of action? Could tilt his head, or we could just rotate him a little bit. We could shift him so that he's curved just a little bit. So we can also use line of action to tell more about personalities, emotions, whether they're having a more rigid action or a more relaxed action. So let's look at some other pictures here. So we have this dude right here. He looks like he's probably an advertiser for like an airline, or maybe he's trying to sell you something. But his contrapposto is very straightforward. His line of action is very up and down. It's very boring. Just by changing his pose, he looks a bit more natural, a little bit more relaxed. His contrapposto, while subtle, is definitely there, and his line of action is a bit more arcing. So let's take a look at this guy. He looks like maybe he's studying for a test, but he's still very rigid. He's got a very stiff contrapposto line, a very stiff line of action. But if we were to be like, hey, relax a little bit, get into a more comfier pose, we get a better contrapposto and a better line of action. Now, I also said that we can use this to see which way or direction a character can go. So with this guy, what do you think is going to happen? Yeah, he's going down. There's only one direction that his contrapposto could lead him in, and that is this way. We can also use it in every pose of an animation. So here we have a pitcher winding up to do a throw. We can follow his animation based off of just his line of action of his body and legs. So you can accurately walk through the whole animation with just that line of action. Now you can also have what's called primary and secondary lines of action. So the primary for these two images of Captain Hook is that center body line. But you can also have a secondary line of action through legs and arms. Now, we can also see this in games, animations, real life, etc. But we can also use it to recognize emotions. So here's a Viking. Greg animated this dude, which is how I have this picture because he made this presentation. So how does this man appear to be acting?
Confidence.
He's confident. He's maybe gloating. He's proud. We can tell that because his line of action is pushing his chest out and he's projecting forwards. What about this part? What about this animation? It's grumpy, it's upset, it's kind of sagged in, he's been defeated. His line of action is curved down because his chest and face are pointing down. We can immediately register what is happening here. So let's take another look at David. His line of action kind of looks wrinkly. And while his contrapposto and overall action of his spine looks pretty good, the overall line of action on him doesn't seem like he would be moving too terribly much. It's a bit like soggy bread in its line. It kind of shifts back and forth. As people, we tend to find smoother lines of action more appealing. Things like large arcs, interesting curves, and more subtle movements. So just like before, you can see them across the entire body. Questions so far? Got line of action, contrapposto, and staging? No? Okay. Silhouettes. We all know what a silhouette is. It's the overall silhouette of an person, object, etc. So let's play a game. What's this? Mickey Mouse. What's this? Bugs. Mario. Lara Croft. Pikachu. Tracer. Team Fortress.
Beatles.
It's the Beatles. Nixon. Anyone guess on this one? It's Shawshank. It's a movie.
Neither do I.
It's a movie. So we can use silhouettes to quickly and easily read what something is, how it's posed, and things like that. We need to make sure that our silhouettes of our poses are clear. That way we can see all the little things at a glance, and it's easier to see and understand. So here's Steve. Is his pose very clear? Do we know what's going on here?
Not really.
No. What about from this angle?
Yes. If there's more information.
Yeah, there's much more information. We can see more negative space between his arms. We can immediately see that there's something going on in here. So this is what his pose was. And here's him, the same pose, just a slightly different angle. Now we can also use silhouettes to see distinctive patterns. So here's Pikachu. There's the silhouette. And there's an opposing silhouette. So with, for example, Pikachu, we can see distinctive patterns. If we were to see just this one orange line, would we know that's Pikachu? No. What about this one orange line? Probably not. What if we saw these two?
Yep.
We can at least hazard a guess that it might be Pikachu, right? So we need to make sure that we are making our imagery of our poses very clear. We can also use it to be able to spot between background, foreground, and character. We need to be able to make it so that it's clear and help identify your audience on what is going to be moving and what's not. What is body and what isn't. So for example, this guy, we need to make sure that our silhouette is happening and is clear because it might happen extremely quickly. You see this a lot in sports. Motion happens extremely quickly. You might miss it if you blink. But you also might see it in games. So this attack sequence is probably over about like 10 frames, if that. And at 30 frames a second, you probably wouldn't read this too quickly. So you need to make sure that your animations are clear, eye-catching, and easily understandable. So you want to really make sure when you break down and exaggerate your poses and make sure your lines of action, so you can really see it on the arm, are clear and easily recognizable. Now, some issues that you might run into. That I know are Greg's pet peeves. These are also my pet peeves. I grade you guys harshly if I see these. Get away from this bind pose. No one stands like this. Try standing like this, feet about 4 inches apart, straight, and then just tease arms out. You can probably hold this for a few minutes, but if you notice, start to slowly try to shift.
All you need to assert your dominance.
Yeah, or at least,
Assert
or at least
dominance.
no one would naturally do it.
Yeah, no one would naturally want to do this. It gets very uncomfortable. So move away from this bind pose. Take this bind pose to a more natural state. Get rid of boat paddle hands. Paddle hands. If you can have your character row a boat with their hands, get rid of it. All you have to do to fix that is slightly relax the hand. Even if you're not going to be animating them, just having more relaxed stature for your hand will make it look a bit more natural. Also get rid of these parallel feet. Again, even if you don't have your arms standing straight out, try to stand with your feet together for a little bit, perfectly parallel. Your body will start to sway, and slowly you might fall over. To fix that, all you got to do is slightly rotate them out, maybe bend the knee, maybe lift an ankle, point a toe, something a little bit more interesting and more eye-catching. We also have this side profile or angled hand. This goes along with paddle hands. Fix it, add a little bit more motion to the body. And other things that you might run into when you have any of these issues is you just haven't manipulated your overall rig far enough. There just needs to be a bit more variation, but sometimes the issue you can have is actually between the character and your camera. This is called coincidental line. Sometimes it's just that it doesn't read well in your scene. So you can see we have this dot here lines up with this box as well as his leg. His hand also lines up with his leg. His fingertip lines up with the box. His head lines up with the box. It just doesn't make for very interesting posing. Everything's kind of all along on the same line and doesn't read as properly. So let's go back to Steve. Let's make him a bit more interesting. What could we do to make him a little bit more eye-catching and posable? Anyone have a suggestion? You could tilt his head, tilt him a little bit more. We can also lift his arms. But now we have the straight foot here, paddle hands. To make him a little bit more interesting even further. Yeah, we can give him a facial expression. Hey. Just give him a little bit more personality. So what are some examples of all of this kind of thrown together in a real world setting? And by real world, I mean classical paintings, because you see these most often. So here's a nice old classical painting. We've got this guy getting pulled out of the river. He's got some really nice contrapposto. He's got a nice line of action, a very clear silhouette. Again, we have another classical painting. He's got a really nice twisted contrapposto, a good line of action, a nice silhouette. What if you are a statue with tiny symbols? You also have a nice contrapposto line, good line of action, nice silhouette. What if you are naked with a whole bunch of instruments? They each have their own contrapposto lines, good lines of action, and good silhouettes. What if you're naked with a swan? You also have good contrapposto lines, a nice line of action, and a clear silhouette. Now, what about David? We've already talked about him a little bit. Again, he has that nice, good, strong contrapposto lines, a bit of a weaker line of action, but he does have a really good silhouette. Now, Michelangelo was really good at these. He knew what he was doing. He could craft poses very well. You can see them all the way down to the toes. All of his poses have really good silhouettes that are easily recognizable. They all have good contrapposto, and they all have good lines of action, even through the whole painting. I mean, this is only a tiny little bit, but we can also see this in old school animation. And we can even see it in games. Bless you. Make sure you're nice. So we have this throughout all the mediums that you all might know. So comic books, good contrapposto, nice good twisting spine, good lines of action that continue through the whole image. A nice good silhouette. Now, you can have this more subtly. So we have nice good contrapposto, good line of action, and we can even use line of action to drive from character 1 to character 2. Good silhouette. You can use this for all sorts of characters. So we have good contrapposto here on Ariel, and her fin even continues her line of action, and her silhouette is nice and clear. Again, we can use those line of action and that contrapposto to go between multiple characters. Even then, even though they're touching each other, their silhouette is still easily recognizable. And remember, you can also break them apart to get even further contrapposto in here down to the face. You can use it for more complex characters, have multiple lines of contrapposto to get a more interesting line of action. Another example of using it in the face. And then, like I said, we want to make sure we are keeping in mind the rule of thirds. So we have nice rule of thirds up and down, as well as left to right. And we also have a nice golden spiral here. Both of the main characters in this shot have good contrapposto. They both have good line of action, wonderful silhouettes, but we can also use your animation to drive that line of action so we can follow with how they want us to follow what is going to happen next based off of that same line of action, using that negative space and what we as people perceive will happen. Questions up to this point? All right. Let's take another look at another principle, exaggeration, with this exaggerated number. Or as I like to think of it, and what Greg likes to think of it is for exaggeration, or exaggeration is push it till you break it. So let's use an example. Fear. Poor Steve. He's like, did I mail that letter to the IRS? I'm sure I did. He's definitely scared, but he looks more worried than anything. I think I mailed that letter, but the IRS is saying I didn't mail that letter. He's definitely a little scared, a bit more worried, maybe nervous. Oh my God, the IRS is here. They're knocking on my door. No one's home. Definitely scared. Oh my God, the IRS is broken in. Everything's going to hell. What can I do? Oh Lord, I am definitely terrified. Is this a broken post? Would this be too far? A little, maybe, depends. Think about Hotel Transylvania. They have extremely exaggerated poses and animation style, right? So for them, this probably wouldn't be broken. But if you're looking for something more like this one, then maybe, yeah. So let's push it one more time. Oh God, yes, that's broken. Let's go back, go back, go back. Once it gets to this point, Control Z. That's broke. Don't just accept the first exaggeration that you try. It might not be the best exaggeration. Sometimes you have to push it a little bit more. Whenever you're going to try something like this, I definitely recommend incrementing and saving. We're just doing a save as, calling it something like exaggeration test 1, 2, 3, 4. That way, if something does happen and you end up here, you can Control Z, or you can just close it and reopen the file that's working properly. But like I said, don't just take the first attempt as the one you want. Questions? Okay. So that's all. There's no homework. Y'all can feel free to run away, take a nap. For those of you that haven't gotten Hobo turned in, I do think I still have it so that you have till into class at 5 to get it turned in. Excuse me. That's because I know a lot of people were having some issues getting it to turn in. Mostly I didn't have it open until about 2 hours ago. So you do have a little bit of extra time on turn in for that. But other than that, there's no homework in this class, and we'll be starting another character animation on Thursday. It'll be Bob. It'll be Bobbot. Binbot. Bob's older brother. Too late. Okay, y'all are free to go. Those of you remoting, y'all don't have to stay. Y'all can head out. Yes, Katie, that is definitely true. Just keep me posted. At most, put it in the revision section. You'll be good. All right. Yes, I will look at that, Jeremy. Question.
So for Hobo, I imported an object